Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd have a stalker, let alone one as deranged as Karen. It all started when I began dating her son, Brad. He seemed nice enough at first, handsome, charming, successful. Our first few dates went well, even though his mom always seemed to coincidentally show up wherever we were. I let it slide, thinking she was just an overprotective parent. Oh, how wrong I was. Things took a turn for the worse one night when Brad invited me over for dinner to meet his family. Right away, Karen got this huge smile on her face and went on and on about how Brad had finally found the perfect girl. She kept making all these suggestive comments about marriage and grandchildren. I awkwardly laughed it off, but Brad seemed really embarrassed. Later, when Brad stepped away for a minute, Karen cornered me. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're going to marry my Bradley, aren't you, dear?" Taken aback, I politely replied that it was too soon to be thinking about that. Well, Karen lost it. She started screaming that I was leading her poor boy on, and that I better not break his heart. At that point, Brad returned and ushered me out of there quickly. That was only the beginning. Karen started showing up everywhere: my apartment, my office, the grocery store. She'd find flimsy excuses to talk to me, all while going on about how Bradley needed a good, devoted wife. The final straw was when she followed me into a lingerie store, loudly announcing to everyone that I was selecting undergarments to seduce her son into marriage. Mortified, I fled the store. That did it. I decided enough was enough. I sat Brad down and gave him an ultimatum. Get your mother under control or we're through. Turns out he was just as fed up with her antics as I was. He agreed to talk to her, though I doubt it did much good. I told him that until she stopped harassing me, he wouldn't be seeing much of me anymore. Well, that must have sent Karen over the edge, because her behavior went off the rails. She started calling me non-stop, leaving threatening voicemails if I didn't answer. She'd wait outside my apartment building for hours, convinced I was hiding Bradley inside. She even got my phone number changed without my consent, but the last straw was when I came home one day to find her rummaging through my underwear drawer. I was simultaneously terrified and enraged. This woman had invaded my privacy and made my life a living hell. That's when I decided to take action. I installed security cameras all over my apartment and started documenting every obsessive thing she did. I filed a restraining order and contacted the police, providing them with all the evidence of her deranged stalking. When the cops showed up at her house to issue the restraining order, she went ballistic, started screaming that I was a manipulative you-know-what who had brainwashed her innocent Bradley. She even took a swing at one of the officers. Thankfully, they were able to restrain her without things getting too ugly. Karen ended up being involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility. Turns out she has some serious mental health issues, and this overprotective mom shtick was just a cover. Honestly, I almost feel bad for her. Almost. Brad and I actually reconnected after some time had passed. He's a great guy who's nothing like his mother. We're taking it very slow this time, and I've made it crystal clear that his mom is to stay far, far away from me if this relationship has any chance of progressing. So far, so good. Brad knows not to bring her up, and Karen is still locked up getting the help she needs. I'm just glad I trusted my instincts. Karen's obsessive behavior could have escalated into something far darker if I hadn't taken action. Ladies, don't ignore red flags just because you want to be polite. And fellas, stand up to your crazy mom if she's ruining your relationship. Stalkers and harassers need to be held accountable. Don't be afraid to speak up and get authorities involved if someone just won't take no for an answer. Your safety comes first. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This just happened. I just finished finals for university and got screwed over. It started in my computer science class a couple of months before today. Projects 3 and 4 were to be group projects. We were assigned a teammate from the class. My teammate, we'll call him Sam, and I decided we'd meet up and work on the project. After discussing what we wanted to do, we found the easiest way would be to work remotely and text each other, as we both have very busy schedules. Flash forward to a week before it's due, and Sam has done nothing. I started working on it and was waiting for him to collaborate. He did not. At this point, I said, forget it, and started working on the project. I got 90% of it done in 3 days and left the other 10% to him. He kept saying how sorry he was and that he was busy. Okay, I get it, I'm busy too. You could have put more effort in, but our peer evaluations will reflect that. Well, he does the last 10%, but not correctly, so I go back in and finish it and submit it, thinking I won't have to deal with him again. Wrong. The next week we had an exam. Exams in this class had an in-class portion and an online coding portion, each worth about 50% of the total exam grade. Online portions were released a few days before and were due before midnight on exam day. Well, at 7 p.m. on exam day, I got a text from Sam asking to send an online portion. I ignored it, and he kept texting. It was like he felt entitled to getting my exam. I wasn't about to fail this test or give a leech blood, but this really pissed me off. Then we had Project 4 assigned. It was essentially an extension of Project 3, so we would have the same groups. This project was much harder and way more time-consuming. Knowing Sam's work ethic last time, I came up with a plan. I did minimal work on the project up until the week before it was due. Then I ramped it up, but not enough to complete the project. The day before it was due, I got a text from Sam saying, "I'm sorry, dude, I was super busy with my other project and didn't have time to work on it. Is there anything left to do?" Now, we used an online code editor that works similarly to Google Docs, in that you can see who is looking at the file and where their cursor is. I had seen his periodically throughout the entire last week. He was checking on how I was doing, but not actually helping, so when he asked, "Is there anything left to do?" my response was no. He apologized profusely. He just texted sorry. And I immediately emailed the professor explaining the situation, then proceeded to finish the project. This guy was going down. A couple of hours later, I got an email back from my professor. Just as I thought, Sam had submitted the incomplete code, each partner submitted separately, as his own. My prof was very understanding and replied with this: "The submission Sam put up was not fully featured or particularly well working, so he did not receive many points. I was unaware who did what, though, and as it seems to be your work, his grade will reflect that. His failures are his own." Justice served, Mother Ducker. I got another text from Sam today, asking me what I got on the project. Telling him that I got an A was the most satisfying thing ever. The next one is a petty revenge story. I used to work for a small delivery company, and I had to deal with the organization of the delivery runs. It was a time-based operation, and I was constantly up against it. We had gotten a new system that only I was trained up to use at the time, and it took me a while to get everything sorted. This girl had gone for the same position as me, but obviously never got it. When the delivery runs were being printed, she offered to check them over, but any slight mistake, I mean even a typo, was loudly broadcast to the whole office. Another mistake! Her boyfriend worked there also, and the two of them would laugh among themselves. It was all brought on by petty jealousy. She had been there longer, but I got the promotion, and she didn't like that. Now I know how hard I had to work in order to keep on top of things, but she didn't. I would spend any free minute doing prep work, because if you started a new day without doing any, you were going to fall behind. And in the transport industry, this can lead to losing contracts over late deliveries. I had a week's holiday due, and she was to cover my work. She was making it seem like it was no big deal and she would breeze through it, so I offered no help and instead planned my petty revenge. I left work on the Friday and told my workmate, who was and still is a good friend of mine, that I had done no prep whatsoever. This girl would have to come in and start afresh. My friend called me on the Friday of my annual leave laughing. Apparently, my colleague had to get her boyfriend over to help her, and the both of them were stressing all day and not getting the work finished until 22 o'clock every day. Not good at all for a small transport company. Monday morning came, and I was called into the managing director's office. It was a small company, and his office was down the hall. I didn't know what to expect, and was getting myself prepped for defending myself. He looked over at me and said, "I owe you an apology." I had no idea the amount of work that was involved. After our chat, I congenially asked my colleague how she got on in my absence, and her face was priceless. Petty, yes. Worth it? Definitely. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Background. Some years back at the start of my career, I worked in insurance. My team was new, and our boss, let's call her Alice, was very ambitious. She had started off as a team lead managing a similar team to ours, and through spending most of her time networking, bootlicking, and making herself the center of important high-visibility projects, she had managed to score a promotion to manager, and was given our team along with her old one. This was very unusual since she should have gotten 2 team lead positions to run said teams, but that's how it had worked out. She had already been disinclined to pay much attention to the actual work even before her promotion, as we basically barely ever saw her. Her ambitions hadn't stopped at her current achievements, So she was always busy trying to keep climbing the corporate ladder. So that the teams could actually run, she picked the two most ambitious people from each team and made them do her job with no promotion or pay increase. I was that person from my team. For about a year, I trained my colleagues, handled payment authorizations through a roundabout way to circumvent company policy, which said I absolutely wasn't allowed to do that, handled disputes within the team, checked over and corrected other people's work, etc. Our company had a policy that once a year we had a skip level one-to-one with our boss's boss. At that meeting, I brought up how unnatural our situation was. The senior manager replied that she hadn't known myself, and the person from the other team were doing so much, and agreed that the structure should be reverted to how it's supposed to be. Indeed, a couple of weeks later, internal postings for the two team lead positions got posted on the company intranet. Fast forward a month or so, and Alice has gathered the teams to make an announcement. The person who had been doing the team lead job from the other team was being made into one officially. In our team, a girl we'll call Jane was getting it. Now I wasn't the only one flabbergasted. Both teams were extremely confused, and several people even voiced that confusion. I didn't know this at the time and only became aware during my eventual exit interview, but Alice had not liked that I'd gone over her head, even if she'd benefited from it ultimately. So in retaliation, she'd given the actual position I'd been doing up until that point to someone else. In a one-to-one meeting with her later when I brought the subject up, she got angry and said, "Just do your job, stop acting like you're important." The malicious compliance. Remember how I said Alice was too busy to ever do her actual job? She paid attention to none of it, including individual team performance. Jane had only been picked because she'd been part of Alice's old team originally, and was perceived as loyal to Alice. We'd needed someone to do the really boring data entry parts of the job which nobody else wanted to do, and the other team had recommended her. I guess we should have been suspicious at that point as to why they were so eager, but Alice had approved it. As it turned out, they'd wanted rid of her because Jane was unintelligent. I'm not using that as an insult but as a descriptor. She was genuinely very unintelligent and struggled with anything beyond very basic data entry tasks. When she was made to do anything harder, she'd generally make a complete mess of it. And now she had to actually run an entire team, train people, approve payments, check other people's work, and so on. All while she herself struggled with anything more complicated than transferring numbers from one system into another. I honestly don't believe Alice was aware of how big of a blunder she'd made here. She just picked someone she thought of as loyal. Of course, Jane tried to have me basically babysit every action she took, but I was having none of it. I was going to do my own job and nothing else since I wasn't important. For context for our US friends, we all had contracts with detailed job descriptions, and in my country, you can't just fire people for no reason. And refusal to do work that's not in the job description is certainly not considered proper cause. I was just a regular employee. None of the management functions I'd been performing up till then were my actual job. The fallout. The team crashed hard over the next 3 months. Complaints went from less than 5 a month to over 20 on average. A lot of incorrect payments were going out. A huge backlog of cases was piling up. Nobody else on the team wanted to help Jane because they knew they'd just end up having to do her job for her with no benefit. The funniest thing was, Alice barely had an inkling there was a problem beyond me being uncooperative, which she was pretty vindictive about, because she was busy advancing her career, and Jane didn't want to admit how hopelessly out of her depth she was. Things came to a head when the quarterly reports caused alarm bells to ring amongst the leadership team. An internal audit was organized, and a lot of the mistakes that had gone through and a whole bunch of leakage were uncovered. Alice had to go explain herself as to why our performance was suddenly so terrible. At this point, she'd finally realized she should have paid more attention to the situation, but unbeknownst to even her, it was too late. Everything from here on is hearsay. I learned it from a friend who was a team lead of a completely different team, so take it with a grain of salt. Apparently, there had been talks about outsourcing teams to India. However, Alice's boss, the one who opened the team lead positions, had been staunchly against it, since it would diminish her fiefdom. The proponents of the outsourcing managed to use our team's horrible quarterly results to justify using the two teams under Alice as a pilot for the outsourcing program. Quite literally the next day after I'd accepted a position in a different company and was planning on giving notice, we were gathered and informed our teams would be shuttered in 4 months, and that we'd be training our replacements in India during that period. I heard from colleagues who stayed till the end that Alice was not offered another position after her teams were made redundant. Not surprising, really. Open manager positions and new teams didn't exactly grow on trees. Sadly, the pilot was considered a success, which honestly I personally find somewhat dubious, but the Indian Center was certainly a lot cheaper than us. And I learned via LinkedIn about a year and a half later that the entire department had been shuttered. So realistically, the whole thing was probably inevitable, but at the very least, Alice could have bought herself an extra year if she'd cared a bit more. The next one is an entitled people story. As the title says, last week, I kicked what I thought was a good friend out of my house because I can no longer handle her antics. Just want to write it here just to de-stress and deal with the grief of losing a friend. Kendall, 25F, and I met in university in 2016. We studied different majors but were from the same department, so we shared many classes together and bonded over our passion for gaming and memes. Upon graduation, Kendall moved back to her hometown due to COVID and found a job there. We kept in touch online through Instagram. About 3 years later, Kendall told me she found a better paying job in the city, so she's planning to move out from her parents' place. When I asked her about her plans for her accommodations, she replied with, "That's the thing. I was going to ask if you have an extra bedroom that I could move into." For context, I have inherited an apartment from my late grandfather, which is a nice 3-bedroom, 2-bath near the city center, last year in January. I currently live alone there since it is closer to my workplace and has all the convenience of public transport. After some thinking, I thought that there's no harm in living with Kendall since I considered us as close friends. We discussed the terms and, of course, the rent. A week later, Kendall moved into my apartment. It was great at first. My home felt more lively than usual, and the thought of going home to a close friend warmed my heart and gave me a sense of security. Things were okay for a while, and then things went downhill super quick. Kendall started complaining about many things at home, her work, her savings, and how she feels homesick. At first, I was very accommodating, thinking maybe she just needs time to get used to the city life. I offered as much help as I can, even to the point of if she's low on money, I don't mind waiving a month's rent if it meant I could help her achieve financial stability. I taught her how I save money, how I live off with my then low salary with several commitments like my car, my dog, and a student loan. I grew up where my parents expect me to be independent, so I told her things I do when I'm low on cash, how to get freelance jobs, etc. But she always seems to have excuses for every suggestion I have. Finding a freelance job is too hard, or how she couldn't let go of her premium junk food, that she isn't willing to cook or meal prep, and I eventually decided to leave it as it is. And after 2 months of living together, I realized Kendall started treating me as some kind of competition. She would constantly ask me things like how much money I make a month, how many job hoppings did that take. Anything that she thinks she's better than me, she'll definitely pop that question. She boasts about how she is loyal to her shashty-paying company, and how I would never be able to move up the corporate ladder as she called me an industry frog. She once snooped my savings balance and asked how TF did I have so much saved up with commitments, etc. Mind you, she didn't have a lot of commitments since her parents paid off her student loans and fully paid off a brand new car for her. And maybe I should stop collecting rent from her. I got mad and told her if she isn't happy living with me, maybe she should move out. Cue crocodile tears as she said it was a joke. I didn't have to take her seriously. She begged for forgiveness and promised to never snoop my personal items and details again. I let it go once, but she kept bringing things up like, "Well, you have the cash and a credit card," every time I told her I'd rather stay home because I no longer have the budget to go out and have fun. Comments like these became more frequent when I got a new job 6 months ago. On top of that, she doesn't clean up after herself, tried to flirt with my boyfriend, and at times parked in my parking space when our initial agreement was that she has to find her own parking space if she's moving in with her own car because my apartment only has one parking lot per unit. The straw that broke the camel's back was when I caught her kicking my dog in his abdomen when I got home from work. I yelled at her and rushed to check my dog. Luckily, he was fine, but I still rushed him to the vet for safety measures. I got home, and she sneered that it was just a dog, and as a friend, I shouldn't treat her like that. I asked why she'd kicked my dog, and she didn't answer me. She shrugged and tried to escape into her room. At this point, it was already about a year since Kendall moved in with me. I lost my cool and told her off, bringing up her problems and how I tried to be nice and accommodating. Then I told her I'm giving her a week to move out and that from then on, I'd rather we keep our relationship casual or we don't ever talk at all. Kendall cried and begged me not to kick her out, but soon it turned into her screaming back at me, calling me a bad friend because apparently, in her words, I didn't tell her off on how badly she was behaving. Like WTF? There was a lot of back and forth, which I don't remember what I said, but I remember eventually calling her an entitled brat. She cried again, saying it was uncalled for, and stormed off to her room. The next day, I was bombarded with texts from other uni friends, some calling me selfish, and others sympathized with me. Apparently, Kendall posted our argument on Facebook and Instagram, painting me to be the bad guy. I was upset at first, but I decided that after Kendall moved out, we would no longer be friends, as well as those who took her side of the story and condemned me. Last week, Kendall left, and I've changed the locks on my apartment. I curled up in bed and cried myself out, probably from the sadness of losing a friend, or maybe I am finally letting out all the frustrations. I am definitely still grieving about this loss of a friend, as I've had many good times with Kendall. For now, I want to focus on myself, and hopefully I eventually get over this. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.